Hey everyone, if you're new here, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss out on the nightmares we uncover. And if this story resonates with you, if you feel that chill creeping down your spine, please share it with someone who appreciates a truly terrifying tale. Because what I'm about to tell you is something I swore I'd never speak of again. It's a story etched into my memory, a true story about a place I thought was just woods, but turned out to be something far, far worse. It's about what happens when the darkness doesn't just surround you, it actively listens. It all started a few years ago. I was going through a rough patch, lost my job, my relationship had imploded, and I just needed to get away from everything. My cousin Mark, who lives out in a more rural part of the state, suggested I come stay with him for a while. He lived on the edge of a massive, old forest, the kind that locals have names for, the kind that's steeped in folklore and hushed warnings. Mark called it Blackwood Forest, and even the name felt heavy. He told me stories about it, the usual local legends, lost hikers, strange lights, things that go bump in the night. But I was too broken, too numb to really care. I just needed quiet. I thought a few weeks in a remote cabin surrounded by trees would be the perfect escape. I was so wrong. When I arrived, Mark's place was exactly as he described, a small rustic cabin nestled right up against the tree line. The forest itself was intimidating. The trees were ancient, their branches twisted like skeletal fingers, and the canopy was so thick that even on a sunny day, the ground remained perpetually in shadow. The air always smelled damp, like decaying leaves and something subtly metallic. Mark was a good guy, and he tried to keep my spirits up, but I could see the unease in his eyes whenever he looked towards the woods. He'd grown up with the stories, and unlike me, he'd never dismissed them entirely. He warned me not to wander too far, especially after dark. "The woods change at night," he'd say, his voice low. "They're not friendly." For the first few days, it was just quiet, almost too quiet. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds or the occasional snap of a twig outside. But that metallic smell was always there, and sometimes, when the wind blew just right, I thought I could hear faint, almost indistinguishable whispers, like a crowd talking just out of earshot. I'd shake it off as the wind playing tricks, my mind trying to conjure something to fill the void. I started taking walks, trying to clear my head. At first, I stayed close to the cabin, following familiar paths, but the woods felt different the deeper I went. The trees seemed to press in, the paths became less clear, and the silence grew heavier, more expectant. One afternoon, I decided to go deeper than I had before. I marked my path with small piles of stones, convinced I knew what I was doing. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to watch me. The sounds of nature faded away, replaced by an oppressive stillness. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for me. Then I stumbled upon something. It wasn't a marker or a clearing. It was a circle of stones, ancient and moss-covered, in the heart of a small, unnaturally dark clearing. In the center of the circle, the ground was disturbed, as if something had been buried there and unearthed. A strange, faint shimmer seemed to hang in the air above the disturbed earth, almost like heat haze, but it was cold, terribly cold. That's when the whisper started, not just in the wind, but around me, close, as if someone was standing right behind me, murmuring. And then, clearer than anything I'd heard before, a single word, chilling and distinct, slithered into my ear. Sleep. I didn't hesitate. My carefully placed stones were forgotten. I ran blindly, crashing through undergrowth, tearing my clothes, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line, gasping, back at Mark's cabin. He found me by the back door, pale and shaking uncontrollably. I tried to explain, to tell him about the circle, the whispers, the word. He listened, his face growing grim. He told me I'd found a place the locals called the Whispering Circle, a place of old, dark stories they avoided at all costs. He said people who got too close, sometimes they just didn't come back, or they came back changed. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle of leaves outside sent jolts of terror through me. And then I heard it, faint but unmistakable, from the direction of the woods. A low, guttural whisper, carrying on the night air, a word that would haunt my every waking moment. Sleep. Tells a true horror story, a little fast, a little scary. That whisper, it wasn't the wind, it wasn't my imagination. It was a physical presence, a cold breath on the edge of my hearing that promised something ancient and terrible. I spent that first night wide awake, jumping at every shadow, my mind replaying the terror of the clearing and the chilling command. Mark tried to comfort me, telling me I was safe inside, that the cabin was sturdy. But the forest had already seeped into my consciousness. The metallic scent seemed to cling to my clothes, my hair, even the air inside the cabin. I started having vivid nightmares, dreams of being buried alive in dark earth, of twisted trees closing in, and always, always that whisper, promising sleep, a sleep from which I'd never wake. Mark noticed the change in me. I was jumpy, paranoid, and constantly looking over my shoulder. He suggested I leave, go back home. But a morbid fascination, a terrifying pull, kept me there. The woods were calling to me, and a part of me, the part that had been numb and broken, felt a strange, perverse connection to the darkness I had encountered. It felt powerful. Mark, bless his heart, tried to shield me. He discouraged me from going near the woods, kept the doors locked, and made sure I wasn't alone at night. But the whispers, they started to follow me. At first, they were faint, like distant radio static, just on the edge of perception. But they grew louder, more distinct, especially at night. I'd hear them just as I was drifting off to sleep, a chorus of hushed voices, urging me, tempting me to surrender. One evening, Mark had to go into town for supplies. He left me alone, with strict instructions to lock all the doors and windows and under no circumstances to go outside. I promised, my voice trembling. As soon as his truck disappeared down the gravel drive, the silence in the cabin became deafening. I tried to distract myself, reading a book, but my eyes kept drifting to the windows, to the dark, encroaching trees. The metallic smell was stronger than ever, almost overpowering. And then the whispers started, louder than they had ever been. They weren't just murmuring, they were speaking in coherent, albeit fragmented sentences, all directed at me. "He's gone," one voice hissed. "You're alone now," another whispered, closer this time. "Come back to the circle." My blood ran cold. They knew Mark was gone. They knew I was alone. Panic set in, but it was mixed with that terrifying curiosity. I found myself walking towards the back door, my hand reaching for the lock. It was like I was in a trance, my own will overridden. The voices were a symphony of temptation, promising peace, rest, and end to all my pain. "Just a little sleep," they cooed. "Just close your eyes. We'll take care of you." As my fingers touched the cold metal of the doorknob, I heard a new sound, a low, guttural growl from the woods, different from the whispers. It wasn't a promise of sleep, it was a promise of something predatory. That snapped me out of it. I recoiled from the door as if burned. "No!" I screamed, the sound raw in my throat. "I won't!" But the woods responded. The wind picked up, a violent gust that rattled the windows and slammed against the cabin walls. The whispers intensified, turning from seductive murmurs to angry hisses. I could hear them pressing against the very structure of the cabin as if trying to force their way in. The metallic smell turned acrid, burning my nostrils. Then I saw it. Through the kitchen window, in the deepening twilight, I saw figures moving between the trees. Not human figures. They were tall, gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long, and they moved with an unnatural, jerky gait. Their forms flickered, indistinct, like shadows detaching themselves from the trees. They weren't just whispering anymore. They were making a low, chittering sound that sent ice through my veins. And in the brief moments when the wind died down, I could hear it again, distinct from the others, a voice that seemed to pierce through the chaos, laced with a chilling hunger. Sleep. Now. My heart was a hummingbird trapped in my chest. I stumbled backward, tripping over a rug, and landed hard on the floor. The growling from the woods intensified, and I could hear something scratching at the back door, a relentless scraping sound like nails on wood. It was too much. The fear, the whispers, the visions, it was all closing in. I scrambled to my feet and ran to Mark's room, grabbing the heavy iron poker from the fireplace. I stood by the door, listening, as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. The voices outside were a maddening chorus, promising oblivion. I knew, with absolute certainty, that if they got in, I wouldn't just be lost, I'd be consumed. And the worst part was, a twisted, terrifying part of me almost wanted to give in, to finally find that promised sleep. The scratching at the back door escalated into a frantic, violent pounding. It wasn't just wood against wood anymore. It was something sharp, something that ripped and tore, splintering the doorframe with each blow. The voices outside had coalesced into a single unified roar of hunger and impatience, a cacophony of whispers and guttural growls that vibrated through the floorboards and into my very bones. I clutched the iron poker, my knuckles white, my body trembling violently. Mark was still on his way back, and I was alone, trapped with whatever ancient horrors dwelled in Blackwood Forest. I backed away from the door, eyes darting around the small cabin, searching for any kind of defense, any escape. There was none. The windows were too small, too barred by the encroaching trees. The only way out was the front door, but I could hear them now, shifting, their unnatural forms slithering around the cabin, their whispers a sibilant tide against the walls. He's here. He's listening. Give him sleep. The word sleep was no longer a gentle invitation. It was a demand, a promise of eternal stillness, of being absorbed into the suffocating darkness of the woods. I remembered Mark's words, "They're not friendly." He hadn't even begun to grasp the reality. These weren't just spirits. They were entities, ancient and malevolent, tied to that accursed clearing, and they fed on fear, on despair, and on the very essence of life. Then the scratching stopped. The pounding ceased. An unnerving silence descended, broken only by my own ragged breathing and the frantic thumping of my heart. This silence was more terrifying than the noise. It was the calm before a storm, the moment of anticipation before the final devastating strike. I cautiously crept towards the kitchen window, poker held high. Through the dim twilight gloom, I could see them. The figures. They were no longer flickering. They were clearer now, standing just beyond the tree line, their forms gaunt and skeletal, their skin like stretched gray parchment. They had no discernible features, only deep, empty sockets where eyes should be, and mouths that seemed to stretch impossibly wide, even in their stillness. They were watching me, waiting. As I stared, mesmerized by their horrifying stillness, one of them, slowly, deliberately, raised a long, spindly arm. It pointed directly at the cabin. And then the whispers returned, not from outside anymore, but from inside the cabin. They slithered from the shadows, from beneath the floorboards, from the very air around me. "You heard us," they hissed. You felt the call, the sleep. It's coming for you. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just outside, they were already inside my head, in my mind, infecting my thoughts. The desire for sleep, for peace, returned with an overwhelming force, a physical ache in my bones, a heavy weight behind my eyes. I fought it, clawing at my own face, trying to shock myself awake. Suddenly, the headlights of Mark's truck pierced through the trees at the end of the drive. The figures outside recoiled, hissing and retreating back into the dense woods as if burned by the light. The whispers inside my head faltered, losing their hold. Mark burst through the front door, his eyes wide with alarm as he saw the splintered back door and my terrified, disheveled state. "What happened?" he yelled, rushing to my side. I could only stammer, pointing towards the woods. He looked, but saw nothing but trees. The silence had returned, but it was a different kind of silence now, an empty, hollow silence, as if whatever had been there had simply vanished, leaving only the lingering dread. Mark quickly reinforced the back door and spent the rest of the night with a shotgun in his lap, his eyes glued to the forest. I didn't sleep, not a wink. The whispers had stopped, but the promise lingered. The next morning, we found an impossibly deep, claw-like mark gouged into the back door, as if something had tried to rip through it. And in the clearing, where the stone circle lay, the disturbed earth was now completely smooth, as if nothing had ever been buried or unearthed. It was as if the forest had reset itself, wiping the slate clean, waiting for its next victim. I left that place the very next day. I couldn't bear to stay another moment. The fear was a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach. I thought I had escaped, but the woods, they don't just let you go. The true story Mark told me wasn't just about some local legend. It was about a place that feeds, and it had tasted my fear, my despair. In the months that followed, I'd still hear them, faintly, just as I was drifting off to sleep. "We hear you. Sleep." The metallic smell would sometimes return, subtle but undeniable. And then, the nightmares started again, more vivid than before. Dreams of being pulled down into the earth, of faces with empty sockets staring at me, their mouths opening to whisper that single, terrifying word. I haven't been back to Blackwood Forest since. I live in a city now, surrounded by concrete and noise, hoping the sheer volume of human activity will drown out the whispers. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is quiet and I'm just on the edge of sleep, I hear it. A faint rustling, a metallic scent on the air, and the chilling echo of voices, drawing me back, always promising that sweet, dark, eternal sleep. They hear me when I sleep, and I fear one day I won't wake up.